Go on then. Go on then.
Welcome, Ramesh Sathiah, to Go On Then. I'd like
Thanks,
to ask you about a few things. The first thing I'd like to ask you about is Songzoo and your part in it.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on. So Songzoo is a music and sound design company that's been around in this form, around about 30 years now, and it grew out of another company, which was Les Gok. Les Gok was the founder of Songzoo, and so he formed this particular company, Songzoo, in McMahon's Point about 30 years ago. And probably for about the last 20 years, we've had offices in Singapore as well. And we're a team of about 40 people in Sydney and Singapore. And we primarily work in essentially music for pictures, anything with visuals. Probably most well known doing music for advertising. But we do quite a bit of music for TV and film, and a lot of audio posts for TV at the moment. Yeah, but essentially anything that's commissioned and generally commercially is the area that we work in.
So is it fair to say that you're the director or the artistic director? What part do you play in it?
Yeah, my title is creative director. I've got a creative director in we've got a couple actually, but my role has generally been running out of Sydney for most of the last 10 years, and before that in Singapore. And the role that I have, essentially the bottom line is I'm responsible to make sure the creative product is good. But, what does that exactly mean? It means a lot of things. Look, I would say the most important thing is actually my job is to decipher the brief. And that might seem simple, but actually that's quite tricky at times, because the bottom line is a lot of the times people don't really know what they want, or they could give you a brief that's really confusing. So I spent a lot of time just figuring out exactly what the brief is and putting it into a form that I think is logical, that makes sense, and that I feel that we can deliver, because the wrong brief can send you down a complete rabbit hole. Or I just sort of work through a methodical process with the clients to make sure we all agree that this is a good idea. And that can sometimes start by saying, hey, look, we don't really know what we're doing yet, so let's work through a process of figuring out what is the right direction for this job.
Right. So you work with a number of composers.
Yes.
And that how does that structure work? How many? There's like 10 or 12 composers working around there with you?
I mean, in Songzoo, essentially on staff, including some of the partners who are composers, there's 8 or 9 of us, I think.
Right.
And then there's at least a few freelancers who work with us all the time, like every month, I'd say. And then there's a handful of specialist people who I use every now and again.
Right. So in terms of I know you as a composer and as a producer and as an engineer and a sort of multitasking person in a studio who has a knowledge across a whole broad band of things. How do you use that in the context of what we're talking about here in Songzoo?
Yeah, well, it's funny, like what skill sets sort of take you to a certain job that suits you. Like I've somehow landed on a job that really suits my skill sets. My skill set, I think is perfect for what I do, which is a total fluke. I honestly don't know how that happened, or maybe it isn't. I don't know, but I'll tell you. So what are the pieces of the puzzle? And it's different for everybody, because there are other people who do my job who have a different skill set to me. But I guess the skill set I have is, you're right. Like there's a fairly decent knowledge across a whole lot of styles, I think, and I've, over the years had to build more knowledge I feel like there's not too many styles of music I work in that I don't have a reasonable understanding. I might not be the best person at doing it, but I generally understand how it works. And, say, for example, even with a jazz thing now, I can look at the chart and know what's going on. And orchestral music, I know how it kind of works, but there are better people who write orchestral people with me. In electronic, I've got a fairly good grip on that. But actually, probably the most important part of it is actually people skills. A lot of what we're trying to do and what I'm trying to do in my job now is put the thinking before we execute.
In terms of the last 15 years or so that you've been involved longer, I know, maybe 20 years. How do you think how do you think the industry that you're involved in has changed in relation to, for example, what I would describe as a crossover between sonic art and commercial music?
Yeah, well, actually, that's an interesting point. Everything we do is about context. Like what this particular job is about music in context to something. And funnily enough, I don't necessarily feel like the most important thing is actually to the pictures. Strangely enough, even though I work with pictures, it's actually primarily in context of whatever the idea is. And so what's the idea of the ad? I mean, sometimes there are ads that are just visual. It's like, here's some great pictures, write some great music, and that sort of like it depends. The fashion changes over time. Like we had a period probably in the God, I'm losing track of time. Probably in the 90s where there were heaps of ads that were just about great pictures and nice music and cool sound design. But then that's not the fashion now. Now it's more about, it's either dialogue driven or a comedy thing, or it's a lot much more wordy at the moment. I'd say in the last 10 years, everything's written against words, and or mostly against either dialogue on the screen or a voiceover. Might be telling a story or some kind of poem. And so actually, to me, I hang a lot of our music off the words.
I'm going to play you something now. I'll just flick the switch to Disneyland, as they say. I'm just going to play this, and then we'll talk about it.
You in the club with your homie,
bunch of players,
blindness all around you,
so damn boring.
Make the call,
you want it all,
head to the bar,
it's not that far,
to buy a round, to buy a
you're
round.
generous,
That it hits you,
feel it in the air,
Saint your man,
you never end.
you want it all, you like it raw. Time to get some, time to get
yeah, play it, give it.
Ain't no closest dreams,
It's a play straight,
ain't no boy band
it's a
dream,
manly train,
ain't no dandy
it's a
dream,
maverick straight.
ain't no closest dream. Pick up your drink now
So heavy,
and take a sip.
oh gosh damn,
What's that you see?
that's a fountain
Your tongue is dancing.
in your
You
mouth.
can't believe it and you laugh out loud.
Tastes amazing,
Problem solved.
like algebra.
You got to clear drink, mucho macho.
Five times a third.
Oh, so translucent. No more playlist for you.
Oh, what a great piece! I mean, fantastic, really. And what really interests me is there's only a few elements in this that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
When I watch and listen, and I would describe them as the main voice, which comes up the middle,
Yeah.
and then the answering voices, which come left and right.
Yeah.
And then there's what I would describe as drums, which are not really, they're sort of synthetic things. And then the other great element of this is what I would describe as Foley,
Right.
which is sort of blowing up things and
Yeah.
sound effects. What I'm really interested in is how you achieve that incredible upfrontness in the sound
Mm.
with the mixing of those components.
Well, there's a few people involved in that final process. So, we actually didn't do the audio post mix of that. That was actually, did we? Or maybe we did. I wasn't that involved in it. But, obviously you're trying to balance the music and the voice. The voice is obviously the hero, and everything is working around it. When I explain a little bit about that job, because there was a few different people involved in it. I mean, originally that job was pitched amongst companies around the world. It's for Australia, but they had some companies in the UK and someone from the States and us trying to win it. And essentially what they gave us in the first place was just these lyrics on a piece of paper. And it was like, how do you bring them to life? And I remember reading them going, well, this is weird. Like, what is it?
It was very theatrical, isn't it?
Yeah. But the reference points, I'm a big fan of referencing. I think it's a really important part of the process. And so we started just by trying to find all the different ways you could bring these lyrics on the page to life. So we did, 4 or 5 different genres of music. They were quite, because of them referencing a certain style of music, they were caught into this idea of it being sort of a daggy 90s R&B type of thing with, you know,
Right.
sort of overly flowery vocals and stuff. What I've sort of started to figure out through myself mucking around with it was the key to this was absolutely milking the words and the singing. Like, it was, how do we make every word hilarious and completely over the top in the vocal process, in the vocal style. So I got one of my guys, Nathan Cavalieri, to do this kind of, this is back in when we were doing that 90s style and 90s R&B sort of TLC type of track. And then I actually just sat there for a couple of days just playing around with that falsetto style of phrasing and stuff.
Right.
And eventually, so I ended up finding that whole melody and that style of singing actually quite close to what was there, except obviously it's performed a lot better by somebody else. It was actually shot in LA at Paramount Studios. So I went over and got to watch this amazing production go down. It was by a top American director, a guy called Tom Kuntz.
Oh, wow.
And he's famous for doing these hilarious Old Spice commercials. Totally off. His stuff's completely crazy. But then what we ended up doing with the track later, which is really fun, and that's the version you heard, was like, I just thought, why do we have to do this 90s daggy style of music? And I thought the only reason we're doing that, and this is where where you sort of step in and try to push the client a bit. I'm like, I think we're doing that daggy 90s style because you've seen someone else do it before. Why don't we just do our own thing and make the track really cool and amazing production, but just have these funny vocals and lyrics on top, because your pictures are funny, the singing's funny. Why does the track have to be daggy? The track could be cool. And at the time, we had this amazing guy called Andy Page working with us. And I just said to him, hey, man, here's the vocals. Just do your own. And here's the vocals. And here's the ad. Those two things can't change. We can't change the tempo. We can't change the placement. It's all cut. But just knock yourself out and do a crazy, cool backing track for it. And he is a genius. He ended up after he worked with us for a year or so, which probably wasn't his career highlight, because after that he went to work with Hans Zimmer for like 4 or 5 years. And he's toured the world, and he did all the last 20 amazing Hans Zimmer movies, like Dunkirk and everything. And he came back with that backing track, which I thought was super cool and really
amazing.
Yeah, and that was a good one for us. It won some really cool. Won the Gold Clio.
Oh, did it? Oh, wow.
So yeah.
Look, it's been fascinating talking to you, and I hope we get a chance to do it again. Thank you very much, Ramesh. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Frank.
Talk to you soon.
See you soon.
All the best.
See ya.
Cheers.